We've got a very special episode of Charles Ortel is Overseas today. We're bringing together two long-standing guests who have never met before today. Charles, I'm pleased to introduce you to Andrii Telizhenko. Andrii is the former Ukrainian diplomat and Russiagate whistleblower who has been living in exile, as it were, for many years. Andrii, welcome to the show. Good to see you again.
Oh, Jason, thank you for having me on. Thanks for being part of the show today, Mr. Ortel. With you guys, it's always fun.
No, please, thank you, and please call me Charles.
Okay.
Now, so Andrii, there's a lot of people who maybe haven't seen you before, and I think it might make sense for us to begin just with you giving us an overview of exactly what your background is, what happened, how you came to be sanctioned by the United States of America, what your life has been like under sanctions, and then fill us in on the latest news.
Yeah, it's been a blast, if you can say that. But really, yeah, it's been a long path, basically since the coup in 2014, which unfortunately I was part of, and then witnessed a lot of stuff there. That's a separate show to talk about. I think we did talk about this with you and our friend Lee on the show a couple of years ago. And then I used to work as a senior policy advisor to the first deputy prime minister of Ukraine on security issues and intel and law enforcement. Then I was a senior policy advisor to the prosecutor general of Ukraine in foreign relations and his political issues with Yarema, and then the famous prosecutor Shokin, who Biden fired. And after that, I was appointed as a third secretary to the Embassy of Ukraine in Washington, D.C. to oversee the election process. And that's what I did. And that's where basically the drastic stuff I started to witness. And basically the puzzle started to make sense for me compared to what happened during the prosecutor's office work, what I saw on the Burisma case, Hunter Biden stuff. And then the embassy work basically got the puzzle more and more together, and that's basically my government part of my job. And I started doing private consulting after I left that position. I resigned on my own from the embassy in Washington, D.C. because I didn't support the Ukraine interference in the U.S. elections, which it did, and I started working for Blue Star Strategies and then private sector.
Oh, sorry, Andrii, let me just stop you there for a second, because I know that the Ukrainian interference in the U.S. election is going to be of particular interest to Charles. Maybe you could go into a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, it all started basically in 2016 in January, the first meeting in the White House where I just arrived and the prosecutors from Ukraine came, and I was appointed to be part of their team, even though the United States side did not want the Ukrainian embassy to be part of the government of Ukraine team, which was in Washington, D.C., but through my channels, I got a couple of meetings where I was present. And on one of those meetings, it was end of January, where Eric Shimmerella was there, people like Liz Zentis, the National Security Council staff of Biden and Obama, and the prosecutor's office, prosecutors, Sequeira, the National Anti-Corruption prosecutor, and then the head of NABU, the Anti-Corruption Bureau. And basically the United States side asked for dirt on Manafort. They didn't mention Manafort, but they said a U.S. consultant who worked for Yanukovych, we needed his information on his finances. And everybody knew that was Manafort because that was the only U.S. consultant who actually worked with Yanukovych at the time. So that was basically the first step. And the pressuring of to fire Shokin, that was also mentioned in that meeting. And basically that's where it all started. And a month later, or a month and a half, I was introduced to a woman called Chalupa, Alexandra Chalupa, who was a DNC operative, and I was introduced to her by senior embassy staff, Oksana Shidar and Ambassador Chali, and they said to work with her, and she asked for dirt on presidential candidate Donald Trump to take him off the ballot or against his team. And that was the second part of which basically rose a red flag for me in this situation. And even after that, ambassador confirmed that Chali, you should work with her and give her any information she's asking for. And then the third part was basically Oksana Shidar giving me an order after they published a list of Trump's staff members of his team to look into General Flynn, Carter Page, and George Papadopoulos, and make basically a bio on them, their connections to Russia and the risks of connections to Russia, which were they or were they not. And that's what basically the third red flag was for me. And after that, I left the embassy basically in the end of May of 2016 and came back to Ukraine. And so that was the part which I personally witnessed, and I testified that years later in 2019 in Washington, D.C. to the Federal Election Commission on what I witnessed there under oath. And there was a full-scale investigation which the DNC had to hire tons of lawyers, top lawyers, so Hillary Clinton, to basically represent them within the Federal Election Commission. And after I got sanctioned by the United States government, the U.S. Treasury, and Pompeo, I basically, a month later, they dropped the investigation and said, because Telizhenko's our only witness and he's a Russian agent by the U.S. Treasury, we're going to drop the case and basically not investigate this further on. So that was one of the examples of how my sanctions basically interfered in the investigation. There's others more that we can discuss in the show.
Andrii, if I could jump in here, it's Charles. That timeline you describe is extremely interesting to me. I don't know if you have access where you are to the internet and to the FBI Vault file, which is a publicly available site. But on that site, Jason and I have done many shows about this, that there was an investigation into Hillary Clinton and her use of a private email system that was unvetted and involved unsecure devices and servers. That thing, when we first started looking into it, I think in 2016 or 17, had maybe 1, 2, 3 parts. It's now up to, I think, 70 parts. And it's a treasure trove of information. It's available to the public. You can look at it. You probably, if you looked at it, you might see a lot of interesting things to you. But one of the things that you may or may not know about is, according to this dump, on 2 separate occasions, at least 2, they flesh out the fact that there was a senior State Department whistleblower, senior executive, who'd been a career executive, who sent a letter to James Comey on or about January 11th, 2016. That letter is excerpted, attached in part. It's redacted in part, but there's a lot of meat in it. And basically, that person said, hey, I have evidence. I need to go into a SCIF because I have evidence that Hillary Clinton and senior members of the Obama administration are engaging in criminal activity, corruption. And I suspect this has something to do with Ukraine, and I suspect it also may have something to do with Joe Biden, although it doesn't specifically say Biden in there. Later, I think it's the 22nd of January or thereabouts, again, 2016, so right around the time you're talking about, he doesn't get a response to this letter where he specifically asked Comey for a meeting to go into a SCIF. He said, I have high-level security clearance and let's go into a SCIF and I'll discuss this. So he just showed up at the Washington field office. And there is a memo to the file partially explaining what happened that is suspiciously dated many days after the meeting date. And around January 31st, 2016, the senior FBI agent who was tasked with looking into this Hillary Clinton email thing and by extension, all the stuff that they should have found about the corruption. That person unexpectedly resigned. His last name was what was it, Jason? Gian something or other? Italian name?
Yeah.
Giacalone. 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 So that's one strand. Another strand is that I guess Jason has had more experience with this fellow. I've only seen him on television, but Patrick Byrne has quite a story to tell about how he was involved in getting Hillary Clinton, to be on tape accepting a bribe, again in this same rough time frame. I'd be curious what you may know about the first thing I brought up and also the second thing I brought up. And if you don't know anything, that's fine.
I only heard about this stuff from your podcasts and stuff on the internet. I never like witnessed personally what happened about Hillary and what was going on. And I was never in contact even with her team or anybody from her team that was the senior member, embassy staff, like Shular. She was actually sleeping with one of the DNC and Hillary campaign managers. So she might know more about that. But and actually, Shular was not just an advisor in the senior role in the embassy. She was actually the the main agent, as you can call them, for the security service of Ukraine there, and she was having affairs with the Hillary campaign manager. So she might know
Well,
more about that stuff. Oksana Shular.
Can you just spell that last name? Because I'm not sure.
Shyluar. Shular.
So a Ukrainian national was having an affair with one of Hillary Clinton's campaign senior people?
Yeah, she was actually renting an apartment from him for free, and that was the case in her love affair with him, and plus getting information on stuff that is going to happen within the campaign process within the Democrats. I was working with the Republican side on that event and overseeing that process. So I heard about it only from the news. What you talked about, and unfortunately don't know the details. That's actually very interesting. That was happening at the same time that this process was being basically pushed on Ukraine, and basically to have somebody to blame, like President Trump and prosecutor Shokin, to overfill the media process and just forget about what was going on, really, the Democratic side and Hillary's team and within her emails. So that makes logical sense from what I can say. And that's all what I can say. I only talk about what I personally witnessed or what I can analyze personally. So that's how I work. I'll love to talk about it and hopefully I'll investigate and look into it, and then we can discuss it more.
Okay. So just going back over the timeline, you left your position in DC by sometime in May 2016, is that right?
29th of May 2016.
Okay.
Yes, that's where I resigned and I came back to Ukraine.
And you were still working for the government of Ukraine?
I still have like a couple of weeks. I was working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then I resigned from there and started working for Blue Star Strategies. They offered me a job to be their person in Ukraine to oversee the process of their work in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. So that's where I started to work in the private sector.
Okay, I'm familiar with Blue Star Strategies. Please refresh my recollection as to who started that firm and who ran it.
Yeah, I reported directly to Karen Tramontano and Sally Painter. Karen Tramontano was Deputy Chief of Staff to Bill Clinton, and then she was Chief of Staff to Bill Clinton when he transitioned after the impeachment out of his office. And Sally Painter was advisor to the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, on economic and political issues. So they're part of the Clinton side campaign directly. Definitely a job, so I accepted. Was good pay, official money, working for a foreign lobby firm, which could give me experience. I did not think, and we agreed upon nothing legal will be done from my side. I had to oversee the investigation into the Burisma process in Ukraine and reported back from my channels what is going on. So that's Blue Star Strategies. They're a lobby firm. They oversaw the work of Hunter Biden within Burisma, Basically, officially, they're the PR guys, but unofficially, they were the babysitters for Joe Biden on Hunter Biden through Amos Hochstein, reporting back on how Hunter Biden is doing, reporting on stuff on his work in Ukraine and on Burisma, the company itself. And they knew that the company was corrupt. They had basically a report, one open report, which was given to the public that Burisma is not corrupt, and the real report that Burisma is corrupt given to Joe Biden directly. And I know this from how, because Sally Painter told me this herself personally when I worked with Blue Star. And they basically showed that Burisma is corrupt and Biden knew about it and where his son was working. So that was their job, and basically protect Burisma from any law issues or PR issues at the same time.
So sorry, and as Sally Painter, is she related to Richard Painter? Married to him?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't. Her husband. She talked about him, but I don't remember who he is. I know her son dealt with falsified purses and stuff in New York. He's like a model guy in New York dealing with high-end boutique purses and jewelry and clothes. And there was a scandal a couple of years ago that he was involved in selling fake Birkins to New York elites. And that's only what I know. So I don't remember anything about who her husband is.
AI says that Sally and Richard Painter are prominent professionals operating at the highest levels in U.S. law, politics, and government relations, though they are not public figures related to one another.
Okay, so it just happens to be the same last name. Okay, because I think Richard Painter is somebody who's brought out as a Republican, but he is often, fiercely critical of any Republican initiative. If it's the same guy, I'm thinking of. But anyway, so how long were you at Blue Star Strategies? You joined in June, and then when did you leave?
In June of 2000, I joined in June 2016. We signed a contract and left in June 2017. And they didn't prolong my contract because due to the fact that I actually went public with the stuff in Ukraine, DNC involvement, and in the U.S. elections, and they were very furious about it. Even though I didn't mention their names, they were not part of my media interview, but they were still very furious. They wanted to cancel that contract in January 2017 when the article came out, but they left it until 2017 over the summer, and didn't prolong it afterwards. So we left part ways then. But during that time, I witnessed the stuff when they influenced the U.S. ambassador in Ukraine, made meetings with the prosecutor's office. How Vadim Prozharsky told me how Hunter Biden was paid to the Latvian banks, and Blue Star actually also lobbied a lot of the Latvian banks that the money was filtered through to Hunter Biden. So they oversaw the whole chain of the events in this process, and they never registered for a lot of those stuff they worked on. So a lot of the stuff they worked on, they were off the books, not through FARA. So that's also basically a crime happening there. And I did not talk about them for years until they threatened me after I met Rudy Giuliani in 2019, in May of 2019, and they basically, Sally Painter wrote me a message saying, "You're going to have a lot of trouble if you continue going this path." And that's what I basically agreed upon to testify to the U.S. Senate, Homeland Security Committee and Finance Committee by Senator Ron Johnson of Grassley on Blue Star Strategies and Hunter Biden. Before that, I didn't talk about them at all.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very interesting. So going back then on the Clinton connections, are you aware that the Clinton Foundation began operations in Ukraine around 2003?
Yeah, that was their involvement with left-wing actors in Ukraine, and then Pinchuk got involved later on, a couple of years later on, doing finances. So they were there on the ground for years before. And actually, Soros was in 1983 filtering the ground, and then they came in 10 years later. So they were there for a long, long time.
Yeah, and they actually signed, I believe, in 2004. I have the document somewhere, but I can't put my hands on it in a second. The Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative signed a memorandum of understanding with the government of Ukraine to provide antiretroviral drugs into Ukraine. And as it turned out, those drugs, I believe, were never tested or may not have even been drugs per se. They were fake drugs, but they've been operated.
Yes, sir. That's that's what it was written in the Ukrainian press. Also, some of the parts there were no drugs at all. It was just a PR stunt, and nothing was given to Ukraine, just money laundered. So that's what people wrote in the press during that period of time. That's what I remember also. And what I can add to you, sorry that I blocked you onto this.
It's okay.
Blue Star, Saudi painter Karen Tramontano, during that period of time, worked with presidential candidate Yushchenko, who actually signed and had a contract with them, also not registered through FARA, I believe. But they told me that personally, that they were pushing the narrative that Yushchenko was poisoned and basically pushing this issue on the Orange Revolution within the U.S. State Department to Condoleezza Rice. And they were working for Yushchenko directly, and that's when Putin personally went after them in 2005, 2006 or something. So they were there also for a long, long time. These people are all interconnected.
Mm-hmm. And Blue Star Strategy still exists, I believe, right?
Yes, they do. They lied to the United States Senate about me, about their work. They paid a fine, not for not registering for FARA for 7 years. They got a slap on the wrist, and they continue to do their work. No criminal charges, nothing against their dealings. Nobody investigated them properly, even though when I was in Washington, after I started talking to the United States Senate, I was called up for 5 private meetings within the FBI, Counterintelligence Unit of New York, and they asked me about them also. And after I started giving them information, they were blocked from talking to me at one point, and so we stopped our communications with the FBI itself. Even though they offered me to be their witness or the informant, I denied to sign any documents as I'm doing as a goodwill citizen. And maybe if I would, I wouldn't have sanctions. But nevertheless, I don't want to be some informant or some spook running around. I'm just a citizen, so that's how I dealt with the FBI, and they dropped the case basically after they got too much information.
So just so I and our viewers can keep this straight, this is really a fascinating and sad tale. And I'm sorry you're going through all this. I hope in the end there'll be some resolution in your favor to try to give you back your life. But you became a whistleblower. You started, or you began the process of becoming a whistleblower around when? Was it?
The first time when I spoke publicly on those issues was to the press. Was in December 2016, political and Ukraine interference in U.S. elections.
Mm-hmm.
Then, I believe in the summer of 2017, I spoke to Senator Chuck Grassley's office, somebody from his office, over the phone on those issues.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not basically continue further on with the process at that time. There was not enough evidence. It was just my word against theirs.
Right.
And even though there was an investigation, Politico actually looked into this, and the embassy confirmed, not just to Politico, but to the Hill, the master child, that they worked on the other side. And it was obvious what was happening with the Black Ledger, how it all unfolded, that Ukraine did interfere in elections to take off one of the candidates off the ballot, and his team to make problems with to Paul Manafort. So that was the first part. Then I met, I believe, in 2018, I believe 2019, I met with Congressman David Nunes and a couple, I think 5 or 8 other congressmen were there present. I don't recall their names, but I spoke to David Nunes in a private setting about what I witnessed, and that was 2019, and then in 2000 that was for the Russiagate DNC Ukraine collusion stuff. And then I met Rudy Giuliani, gave my information to him in May of 2019, what I witnessed and what happened during that period of time. And then I gave information to the FBI 2019. And they all came to me. I was not looking for them. They were
Right.
all looking to me. The Political article came through a third party, an American, that advised me to that should go public because things are Washington. People know what happened. Hopefully, if things go public, maybe they can change some staff in the embassy and things would go better for the relationship with Ukraine. So that was the main part. Second part, Devin Nunes also reached out to me also through a third party, and we talked. And then the FBI reached out through a third party, and Senator Ron Johnson reached out through a third party, and I agreed to meet with him and give evidence on Hunter Biden. And the same with Mr. Rudy Giuliani. It was through a third party, they were looking for my contacts, and I reached out and I met him. So that was my whole process, starting from 2017, and then actively in 2019. That's when I basically started going to the different issues of the whistleblower, becoming a whistleblower. I testified to the FEC in the end of 2019. So it was everything that I talked about publicly, it was reconfirmed through different agencies or government bodies on a level of being testifying under oath or talking to those bodies under the understanding that if I lie, I'm going to be sent to prison. So this is my whole path. 2017, 2019, active process, and 2020, after it all comes out, after the Senate committee comes up with a report on Hunter Biden, they sanctioned me, removed my visa, and then sanctioned me as a Russian agent connected to Dergash.
Wow. So, importantly, this happens, the bulk of this whistleblowing experience and the unfortunate reaction from your standpoint, and I think from many people's standpoint, happened all the time that Donald Trump was president in his first term.
Yes. He actually tweeted about this stuff. And then I believe his senior policy advisor, McMaster, who was at that time, blocked those stuff from going further, even though the president of the United States in summer of 2017 tweeted that this should be investigated. He retweeted the Political article I mentioned in. And then in 2019, he retweeted the documentary that I was part of for OAN and said that this should be investigated also. So the president knew, and I know that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, saw my testimonies, which were given to Rudy Giuliani and recorded by him, and they looked on those in the White House cinema, and they talked about what was happening. And the president said this should be investigated, but unfortunately, the people around him, Bill Barr, in other words, they were blocking those investigations. The FBI was not just blocking them; they were working actively against people like me in operation, maybe in the future we'll know Round River. That's what's being discussed right now, but information is still being gathered on that. And so that was the reality. It was all being basically sabotaged, not just by people around Trump, but people within the government system, the deep state itself, as you can call it. One of them was also Pompeo, who was former director of CIA and then head of State Department, who sanctioned me and basically published the sanctions, and then the Treasury confirmed it with their signature. So it was all a huge situation, and I think one of the bodies that was also involved is still working with people with Donald Trump today. I don't want to mention his name. I know that he was unaware of my situation, and he just signed those documents and basically pushed them through to the Treasury. But I know his name.
Oh, okay. Well, so I respect that. If you don't know anything about this particular vector, please just say I don't know. But one of the things that strikes me, having pored over John Solomon's work on this and public records on this, a lot of reporting on this, is the degree to which the United Kingdom, for some strange reason, has a major interest, it seems, in meddling in the UK and in Ukraine, UK, and also in destabilizing Russia. Did you, in your thinking about what was going on at Blue Star Strategies and before that, did you get educated on what the UK was doing in Ukraine, what the UK was doing to try to destabilize Russia, or was that outside of your purview?
Well, I knew that not just working with Blue Star, I knew that before while I was working in the government overseeing Ukrainian intelligence and law enforcement, we were getting reports on the interest of the United Kingdom. And plus, working with foreign bodies in Ukraine for the last 17 years or even more. I believe so. I was the person who was working with different parts of the embassies, U.S., Canada, EU, the G7 embassies back and forth with Ukraine. Senator McCain visits to the coup in Maidan. I knew Senator McCain, I knew Senator Lugar. I knew what was going on within the inside of back and forth. But also on Blue Star, it was interesting that you mentioned that they were also lobbying King Charles, Prince Charles at that time. They're his official lobbyists and PR managers for Prince Charles to become the king of the United Kingdom. Blue Star Strategies had that contract. And how I know that I was told that personally, and plus, Blue Star arranged a meeting for one of my clients with King Charles, Princess Charles' staff, very close advisors on issues that needed financial support from outside, from foreigners, into his fund of rebuilding castles in the UK, that kind of stuff. So I know that Blue Star directly is involved in working with today's king of the United Kingdom, and they're very close connections with him from what they were telling me, not just through business, but also private. That's one thing. Second of all, the UK, it's a historical issue here with the involvement of the UK and going against Russia and using today Ukraine. They didn't not only want to use Ukraine, they wanted to use Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, countries like Armenia, for example, like post-Soviet countries surrounding Russia to destabilize the situation in that region. And this goes back to hundreds of years before, and the most recent is the 20th century involvement in World War One and trying to sabotage Russia. And then after World War II, Churchill trying to work with the German Nazis to actually do a second invasion into the Soviet Union when it was destroyed during World War II. So it's going back and forth throughout the years. But today's involvement is basically psyop operations using third countries, destroying those third countries like Ukraine, which they used in this war, and basically putting them and using them as battlefields to dismantle Russia from within and basically rip it apart and use its resources, because Great Britain is the null. They have nothing. Their economy is done. Their military might, they don't have it from what they had 100 years ago at all. The recent news articles, all their submarines are now under repair because they're not workable, and they have no army. So they need resources and to support themselves, and this is what the world is fighting for. And Russia has a lot of them, so they cannot fight the United States. The United States is their ally and predecessor for their empire, so they're fighting right now Russia as they did for years and years, and using Ukraine because Ukraine sold off. There was a lot of not just the Hillary people, the Democrats, the Soros, but there are also crown agents working in Ukraine. It's an agency like the USAID, but for the United Kingdom. They got into Ukraine years ago, but they started going very rapidly after the coup in 2015. How I know this because I was personally asked to help arrange meetings for the crown agents and the Ukrainian side, Ukrainian government officials, so they could start working with them. And it was done through the United States and a third party within the United States. That's how they got in rapidly working in Ukraine in the last 10 years.
What do you think? I mean, how much do you know? I guess Boris Johnson was he foreign secretary in 2016, wasn't he?
Boris Johnson?
Boris Johnson, yeah. He wasn't, yeah. Was he, I don't think he was prime minister in 2016. I think he was foreign secretary.
No, I don't believe he was a prime minister then.
Yeah, he's foreign secretary. And I think our head of publicly known stuff, our head of the CIA or station chief in the UK was Gina Haspel, I believe, in 2016. And you know, this year for Americans is, in theory, a very special year, 250-year anniversary of our independence. With what's coming out of this Ukraine and Russia debacle, and your own situation, your whistleblowers try to come forward and say, look, we got some serious problems here with corruption in America. And we have been supporting a government that has a leader who it was, I would argue, I'm not a lawyer, but he suspended elections. It's past his term. Why would we be back, and why would the United States, in the 250th year of our celebration of a revolution in support of, enshrining basic human rights and freedoms inside our country, in this year, why would we continue to still back Zelensky and his government and the unelected European Union people, as well as these people in the UK who have been frustrating, I would argue, a complete understanding of what was really going on from just pick 2014 forward in US-UK relations with Ukraine and Russia, and then also with meddling in US elections, I would argue, predating 2014, probably 2012, 14, every subsequent election since. I think there's been foreign interference in US elections, not just federal elections. But for our viewership, how did the Ukrainian government react to the process you went through trying to expose this? Are you?
I got, first of all, the U.S. elections, very easy to interfere in, unfortunately, because it's a system built that you can interfere in. Build it as simple as possible, and you won't be able to interfere as much. Like we have, for example, in Ukraine or the post-Soviet countries, which were told as corrupt, but our system is we print our ballots not on paper, regular paper. We put our ballots on paper, which is printed in the mint where they print the money. So you
Right.
cannot falsify it easily. That's one thing. Second of all, it's all by delisted by voter ID. There's hardly any mail-in ballots. If you want to vote at home, you cannot go physically. You have to get a court order or decision that you cannot physically get to that voting poll station. Then you have the the ballot box come to you in the representation of the people who are from that voting poll station with the security and police and everybody filming this. And if it's too much people voting at home, even with court orders, that raises already a big question. You cannot just send a ballot through your mail and vote for whatever you want. No. So
Right.
Just simplify it. Delete everything, but put voter ID, print the paper in the mint, make it all regulated by numbers, how many pages printed, how much used, and how much not used, and then don't use electronic systems, and nobody will interfere in your elections. That's it. I know it's harder. It's going to be
Right.
a longer process than like one day voting in the United States, but I think the 2020 elections proved that the process was so long for calculating the election results that it'd rather be made simple and old school style than going through that whole sabotage of the presidency of the United States and making the United States look like a fool when they're teaching everybody democracy. That's my point of view on U.S. elections, and I fully support your view on that too. That's on what Ukraine did to me. They did not support me at all. That was actually they went after me. Poroshenko's team was so furious that I went public with this because I knew people and I knew people in his team and working closely to Poroshenko that he called me up and basically yelled at me for over an hour, even though I'm a private citizen, and threatened me. Thank God I was working with people who did not mean to go under the bus, but consulting them. But that was the first signal. And then I had troubles in Ukraine where I had to leave to Canada for a couple of months in 2018. And that's one thing. Second of all, when I got sanctioned and during the Zelensky regime in 2020 in the US, the Zelensky regime sanctioned me back. A Ukrainian citizen, which I'm right now, I have a court. I filed I sued Zelensky for doing that because he cannot sanction citizens of his own country. So he sanctioned me in 2021, 2 days before going to Washington, D.C., to show to the Biden administration that he went against this bad Telizhenko agent guy, or whatever they're calling me. So that's what the Ukrainian government did. No support at all. They're all supporting the other side. They're all working for the other side. Why I mentioned crown agents in the UK and the USAID, because it's not was just work within reforms in Ukraine or giving aid. It was money to buy off politicians and buy off influence within the government through politicians, through people who were in the government. So they would sell off Ukraine, destroy it from within. So there would not be a system, a backbone to not let what has happened in Ukraine today, this war or anything else that was done throughout the last years. And yes, Zelensky is not a legitimate president, not just because we wanted so. By Article 110 of the Constitution of Ukraine, he's not a legitimate president. He cannot prolong his presidency during even a wartime era. He has to give that, or he has to change the law, the Constitution, which he should have done beforehand, and then said, "I have the possibility to be the president even in the wartime process," or give his power to the parliament, which has the authority of in Ukraine today. The speaker of the parliament is the president of the country. So that's the reality. What we're facing today. He's not legitimate. He's just running around taking power, begging for money, and supporting this war. Because if he stops this war, he dies politically and physically because he's dead. The West will not tolerate what he did to them. He knows too much. So this is how I see it, and unfortunately, we're facing a lot of challenges today. The United Kingdom, the deep state in Washington, used Ukraine, and Ukraine. It's not just them to blame; it's the Ukrainian government to blame. Because when I was there, I saw how people, oligarchs, millionaires, were running around. How do we sell to the U.S. embassy? How do we become U.S. agents? How do we work for the CIA? Because they thought it was some game. Because for them, well, it is a game. They wanted just to save their money in the West because all of the corrupt money was flown out of Ukraine. Swiss banks, French banks, German banks, and US banks, they need to save them. Nobody wanted to go against the system, so that's what they did. And the US is protecting all their corrupt officials today. Nobody's speaking a word of what's happening in corruption in Ukraine, how it's being destroyed, because they need Ukraine. They're using Ukraine to fight this war, and this was all understood. I've been talking about this for years before even the war started, about how we should not start this war because Ukraine will be destroyed. We're not going to fight some Moldova or a third country, even though we should not fight anybody. We're fighting the first or second largest nuclear country in the world. It's not going to lead to anything good. And plus, we were part of the country for years. What happened to us? We should not forget our history. And that's what we did. They ripped our history from us, said we were not part of the victory Soviet era, which fought Nazism. We were part of the other side, and people believed in it. Not a lot, but a lot of enough to have this what happened today.
Right. Those are three big themes for me that you just hit on. We'll pick them apart. One of them, I don't think anybody actually knows how much money was sent towards Ukraine, because I think there's a lot of money that went in theory to foundations that were in theory going to send it, and then there's government money. You don't really know how much of that hard cash and the equipment, how much of it actually ultimately reached Ukraine. So let's park that and say it's a number in the hundreds of billions, probably. It's not a trillion, I don't think, but it's in the hundreds of billions. What percent of that money would you guess was stolen?
60, 70%.
Yeah, that's about what I would guess. I think
and 60, 70%, and that's given to the West mostly. It goes back. 10, 15% is left in the pockets of the government officials, and everything else just goes back to the banks, military-industrial complex in the West. And that's they launder the money through United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and that's what it goes back to Europe and then the United States.
Exactly. So there's that. Then what would you say to Hunter Biden, who is mouthing off and being given, the chance with Candace Owens and other people to tell, supposedly his side? He's saying that not only is he saying he never really made any money off Ukraine, but he's going further to say, and look over here at the Trump family. Look how much money they're making now in the second term. What would you say? What is your candid assessment of the credibility of Hunter Biden and the likelihood that he has basically, with respect to Ukraine, been part of the grift mill, enriching himself and likely his family? To what scale of money? Are we talking millions, tens of millions, hundreds of thousands, or is he actually correct that he really didn't profit off his name?
He made millions, and maybe up to 20 million, that's for sure. Cash
US.
and official U.S. cash and official payments. There was the official payments that were going through the Baltics and to his account, which everybody saw that was publicly made. And but the problem was with that money was also investigated because the company Burisma was corrupted by itself. The foundation of the company, the owner Burisma, being the Minister of Ecology, gave out warrants for land where there was gas to himself. Then basically formed the company, which was the largest gas producer. He knew where those origins of gas were because he did that through the corrupt process, knowing that. So that was one thing. The money itself was laundered and then given to Hunter Biden openly. That was also investigated. That money, that investigation was in a full-scale process. And Zlochevsky, the owner of Burisma, had actually his assets frozen in Ukraine by Shokin. So, and Hunter Biden knew about that. And when Hunter Biden joined to the company, and I said Blue Star gave Joe Biden the information on what Burisma really is, and he knew that it was corrupt. It was not legitimate money. A lot of it was cash payments to Hunter Biden when he would fly to Europe or anywhere else in the world. I know that personally because Vadim Pozharsky, the second guy in the Burisma, personally told me that he was giving Hunter Biden that money in cash a lot of ways, and then he would spend it all almost right away on drugs and prostitutes around the world. And they would have to call sometimes even his former wife to call and stop him from going haywired in this whole process because he would just spend it all right away. Maybe he doesn't remember. That's why he thinks he didn't get anything because he.
Andrii, quickly, one thing about Hunter Biden is that there's this photograph of him with Joe and with this guy, Kenes Rakashev, who was the chairman of ABT Bank or BTA Bank, I think it's called, in Kazakhstan. And this is the guy who wired Hunter Biden $143,000 that he right away sent to the Porsche dealership. Do you know anything about the Kazakhstan connection?
No, well, the Kazakhstan, I heard about it, but I personally don't know. I know that the Ukraine stuff, which I personally witnessed. So
it's just another money laundering.
It's another episode of whatever happened in Romania and Russia and also around the globe. So nobody's calling Hunter Biden a Russian agent, even though he took money from the Russian mayor's wife or whatever that story. But I can tell you that Hunter Biden didn't have to remember what he took, but he was given a lot of money in cash. Those official payments were just pennies compared to what the cash payments were given to him around the globe, where he would travel and meet Vadim Pozharsky, who would babysit him for Burisma and basically had to handle his all problems. And when Hunter Biden talks about the Trump family, is there an ongoing investigation in what the Trump family is doing and working with somebody? No. Like, there's no evidence of that. And we're talking about evidence that Hunter Biden was working for one of the most corrupt companies in Ukraine with the largest capital, as you can say that, and former government officials of the Yanukovych era, which the Democrats so-called fought. And those people are not sanctioned. They have no problems at all in the United States. Vadim Pozharsky, who was involved in that, had no problems and still goes to the United States. And so Hunter Biden knew what he was doing. He got a sweet deal, and he used it to make money for himself and for his family, or for his father, the big guy. And that's the reality. And everybody knows about this. And now he's saying that he's this nice young guy. Everybody's a nice young guy until you start doing trouble. I told the truth, and I was told that I'm a Russian agent, a Russian spy. What did he do good for Ukraine? Did he do anything good for Ukraine? No. Did he stop the war in Ukraine? No. Did he do anything good for the United States, at least, being a citizen and a son of the vice president and the president? No, he painted paintings and then sold them off for hundreds of thousands of dollars and laundered money to that. So that was the whole process for him. Making money, putting in good teeth, and not even supporting his other family that he basically tore apart. So I don't want to go in personal details on him, like on his own family stuff, but what did he do good that he's going to come up and say right now that he's a nice young guy? He did nothing wrong. Nothing.
Right. Well, a couple of things there. First, I question whether he even painted the paintings. And the second thing is, the second thing is you said that Joe Biden was briefed by Blue Star that Burisma was corrupt in 2016. Is that right?
No, before. They briefed him when they started working. I think, I believe 2014, end of 14, 2015, that the company is corrupt. They made
Blue,
Blue Star, yes.
Blue Star.
They worked directly. They were asked by Joe Biden to come into work on Hunter Biden to babysit him, and it was a request personally by the Vice President of the United States, and they collaborated and did their work, so they would not meet all the time through Amos Hochstein, who was the energy guy in the State Department at that time, and they would send out papers through him to Joe Biden on the Burisma stuff. So that's how the system worked for them. That's what they personally told me while I was working for Blue Star. Karen and Sally Painter.
Right. So Karen Tramontano, obviously, she's a controversial person in the Clinton history because some people, myself included, believe that she completely screwed up the establishing the Clinton Foundation for Bill in New York. None of the required legal filings were made, and they still have not been made for that process. And
she's proud of what she did. Actually, that's what she told me. She's proud of how she did her work in New York. Just some headliners.
She's proud of failing, huh? Well, that's great. But I wonder whether Blue Star is really, whether the hidden hands behind Blue Star aren't the Clinton family, Bill and Hillary. That that Blue Star goes and says they're going to do this stuff, but they don't really have the ability. Maybe Hochstein does, but I don't think Tramontano does to do anything substantive. But it's maybe Bill and Hillary and others around the Clintons who are pulling the levers that need to be pulled for Prince Charles and all these fancy people to get stuff done. This is just a surmise.
That may be the case. I never personally witnessed that, but they would things. I know that they're very powerful with Blue Star itself. It's not a big known company, but they could have get things done. Not Sally and Karen personally, but the company itself. They could get things done. They could have go off the hooks and push on different issues when needed, and they're very proud, and they would personally say that they are connected to the Clintons directly. And Hillary, their good friend, and they coordinate with her on time-to-time basis. So that's what they don't even hide it. Right. And but as I said, the company goes off the hook without any problems. For not registering with FARA, even though it was public and nothing happens to them, they go off the hook for not doing. They basically meddle in Eastern European politics, starting from the Orange Revolution, the Orange Coup in 2004, and then in Macedonia. They do a lot of work for Macedonia. They did a lot of work for Macedonia during that period of time when I worked for them. So the United Kingdom, Albania, you name it, they're all around the globe. China, and they're working everywhere, and they're not a huge firm that they can handle all this by itself, but they do somehow. So there's a lot of questions how to do it, and maybe you're onto something here that I cannot deny, because they did talk about having direct connections to the Clintons and to Hillary and Bill.
And, Charles, to one of your theories that we've spoken about before, and also a question that's coming from our viewers right now, there's this from 2005, the Nunn-Lugar biological agreement was signed in Ukraine and extended beyond biological weapons, having to do, I'm not familiar with this, but our commenter here, Lutz or something, is saying that this had to do with disarming Ukraine's nuclear weapons.
Well, so that episode you're talking about is most famous because Barack Obama became a national elected politician in 2004 when he won his Senate campaign. And Richard Lugar, a Rhodes Scholar, and I think a Republican, although probably a Rhino, was then, I believe, head of, or senior guy in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So
he was the head later on.
Yeah, and he took Obama on his first foreign junket, and I think they were in the Soviet. Was it the Soviet Union? They were in Russia, not the Soviet Union, when I believe the Russians took the passports of Obama, and I mean, there's a reporting of this. I don't know if it actually happened, but I've seen reports of it, that Obama and Lugar's passports were both taken on that inaugural trip of Barack Obama as a new senator traveling with Lugar to do what he eventually did with Lugar, with what you're talking about. It's my recollection. I don't know. Do you know about that?
From I personally, I know what happened in Ukraine because then Senator Obama at that time went to Ukraine within that period of time, and somebody called him the N-word in Ukraine, for which afterward he did not like Ukraine for a long, long time.
Hmm.
That's why he had Joe Biden and Susan Rice deal with it, and they didn't want to hear in Ukraine at all. That's
Is
what I
that
was
right?
told. That's not just some rumor from the street. It's why within the government, that's what it was known about on Obama and what happened to him in Ukraine. So that was a big scandal. And he took, and then he basically hated Ukraine, used Ukraine. Was also he was the one who inspected the biolabs in Ukraine when he was a senator, and
Huh.
he knew about those biolabs, and he was pushing to make them that production of bioweapons in Ukraine larger, which did happen during his presidency. And they extended that and basically took away control from the Ukrainian government of those biolabs because it was before joint control, and
Huh.
when he was the senator, and when they opened during the Bush administration, and then when Obama became president, the CIA or who was responsible for those biolabs, I think the CIA partially also they took away full control from the Ukrainian side and basically handled it all on their own and expanded those for I think 20 or biolabs or even more.
Wow, that's just amazing. Now, another thing I have to confess, I who do enjoy studying history don't know enough about the history of Eastern Europe and Soviet Union and before the Soviet Union, Russia and eastern portion of Europe. I just don't know the history perhaps the way I should. But I think there are allegations that there are neo-Nazi elements in Ukraine even now in 2026. Is that fantasy? Is that um, reality? Is it in between?
Well, that's true. There are not just neo-Nazi, there are Nazi groups in Ukraine, and they were there in the 20th century. They were collaborators, the UPA, OUN, and Banderas, Melnik. One of the Melnik was just his body was sent from from Luxembourg to Ukraine to be reburied, and he was reburied with full honor, even though he was responsible for pogroms. He was responsible for killing millions of Jews, Russians, Polish citizens, uh, Ukrainians who supported the Soviet Union, Gypsy. So he was part of this, and they were not just collaborators; they were working for the SS, Nazis, and this was all confirmed during the Nuremberg trials. They were given and informed by the German government, and later on, after the Nazi regime fell and was conquered by the Allies, the CIA supported those Nazi collaborators. UPA, Banderas, all of those guys fled. The leadership fled the diaspora, Ukrainian diaspora, most of it in the United States and Canada, as former Nazis. They were basically part of the Banderas or Mennik group, and they were brought in by the CIA, and the CIA gave them protection and support. A lot of that's why you have all that Ukrainian diaspora hating the Soviet Union because they were brought up in the way to hate it because they're Nazis. They hated anything that was not what they believed in. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. And right now in Ukraine, those people are celebrated. It started to happen after the Ukraine got its independence in 1991, but or after the Orange Revolution started to be pushed more and more, even though the Ukrainian society did not support that idea. Most of the Ukrainians did not like Banderas or UNUPA, the neo-Nazi groups. They all our grandfathers and great grandfathers fought in World War II, and people remember that. But after the coup in 2014, it was pushed in the narrative that it's good to support those groups. Those groups fought for real Ukraine and not the Soviet Russia Ukraine, and we are real Ukrainians, and that's how it got into people's minds, and by basically the government not just pushing that, but also pushing the narrative of blocking and you cannot celebrate the 9th of May, the the Victory Day, which is sacred for a lot of Soviet people or post-Soviet countries, because as I said, 27
Sure.
million
Sure.
Soviets died during World War II. Our military went in and conquered Berlin. And so we were, so everybody remembers what happened, and we fought off the Nazis for Europe, and it was the secret. And the government banned that day. If you want to go out after the coup in 2014 and try to celebrate it, like we started in 2017, 18, you could get beaten up by these neo-Nazi groups, and the police would not do anything. And then they would just ban it at all. You cannot just go in, and if you would come there, people you could be arrested. And they basically glorified those neo-Nazi groups by giving them official protection, naming the streets after neo-Nazis and Nazis in Ukraine. So you don't have streets of people who fought in the Soviet times for victory of the country and for cleaning out of the Nazis, but you have people of Bandera streets named all over Ukraine more than 500 times. You have Soviet monuments being destroyed for the Soviet soldiers who fought and died for our freedom being destroyed by today's regime. You are given the neo-Nazis and Nazis basically official medals. Yushchenko gave Bandera the Hero of Ukraine medal on the government level. So it's been Ukrainian state today when they say, oh, Zelensky is a Jew, he cannot, there's neo-Nazism in Ukraine. It's been glorified and supported on the government level. And today basically is the last drop where they reburied one of the Nazis in Ukraine with the full-scale parade and glorification as he's a hero, where Poland is stood up in fear and shock at what is happening with you guys. You guys slaughtered 300,000 of our people. What are you glorifying them for? Even though Poland knew what Ukraine was, but now they need to use the situation right now. But itself is an example that it's true.
Right.
And
Right.
the soldiers in Ukraine are wearing Nazi uniforms and Nazi crosses, Nazi tattoos with swastika on their hands. This is the reality. It's not just the regular people. And I know when I was in the government, the Azov battalions, the right sector battalions, we had a file on them because they were coordinated by the security service of Ukraine, our intelligence, and then our intelligence would report back to the British and the United States intelligence, the CIA, the MI6, who would basically coordinated their whole full process of how to work within Ukraine and within the Donbass civil war against Russia, and how basically to make those guys brutal and finance them and support them and give them tactics of the CIA and MI6 would be used against Russian soldiers in the future. So this is all there. It's being protected by the West because they made this in Ukraine. They financed this after the Nazis in Ukraine, and they continue to finance it today under this regime in Kiev.
Yeah, I visited Ukraine quite a few times between April of 2010 and January of 2012, not just Kyiv, Odessa, many places. Actually, one place I spent time in was Donetsk. And then I think that was in the summer of 2000, whatever, there was a big fire in Russia, and it was hot in the summer, and the smoke from that fire was a problem in Donetsk. I was there, and some rich guy had rebuilt the center of the city then, the big industrial.
Yeah,
and it was actually beautiful then. I don't think it's so nice anymore, but it was quite something. Wow, that's quite a tale you're telling there. No, but when we think about Ukraine and what's left of it, at its peak, Ukraine had how many people? Was it 40 odd million, 50 odd million?
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had 52 million citizens.
52.
52 million. Within the 10-year span of its so-called independence, Ukraine got, I believe so, around 40, 45, officially, unofficially around 42 million. That's what's left. So basically 10 million are left or died during that period of time because people could not support themselves or they had to flee or starve to death. And then later on, it became around 35 million around 2014, 15. So that was the base number in 2015, 35 million officially citizens living in Ukraine, even though on paper it was much more that was used for elections to falsify elections when needed. So that's unfortunately that's the reality. And then after the war started, Ukraine right now is left less than 20 million. Some say it's 20. There's numbers around 15. and more than half of it's women, children, and elderly folks. 3.5 million men are only in Ukraine left. They're hiding out of that 15, 20 million. So that's the
Wow.
reality.
Wow.
Ukraine was not just losing demographically now, it was losing long before, but now it just expanded in a huge scale. And I can tell you around 10 million Ukrainians fled, not to the West, but to Russia.
Right. Right.
10 million Ukrainians fled to Russia. It was not just from Donbass, but other areas. And another 10 million around fled to the West, or less, plus minus. So this is the reality. You have the country was always not divided, but it had two parts, West and East. There was no problem with that. Ukraine was great for that. Ukraine was in the middle. It was a hub in the middle between the East and West that could be used and gained its power, but it lost its power because the politicians in Ukraine were too greedy, and the West wanted Ukraine to be used against Russia.
Right. And my recollection is, and of course, Ukraine has lost some territory, but overall, I think Ukraine
20% territory is lost.
So 80%, but it's still at 80% of its former territory. It's still, is it the largest landmass in Greater Europe?
It was the largest landmass in Europe before, I believe so, until today. Should be also it should be one of the largest today also, but it's one of the top two, that's for sure.
Right. And it's got, I was on the board of an Indian company, actually. We're trying to do metallurgical deals with Ukrainian scientists and things in different academic places across Ukraine. And we would go by air, but we would also, just to see the countryside, go by car. And I could personally attest, I mean, it's a vast, vast farmland, forests, and when you hear that a country had 52 million people, Jason has heard this from me forever, that when you think about companies, and my expertise is companies, not countries or governments, but a company whose revenues are declining is not going to be all that profitable. It's very difficult in a world where population is expanding to be a company with your revenues are going down. And so a country that has an infrastructure that obviously has not been maintained, in fact, it's been bombed, that now has a population less than half of what it once was at peak. That's really rough stuff. And it's an aging population too. I think it's got young kids and then older retirees, and it's skewed, isn't it? The women are older than the men. It's I don't know how to describe it, but I mean, the people behind the foreign policies that have influenced what has happened inside Ukraine really should hang up their shingles, or worse, at least the Western side. We have actually interviewed, I think he was formerly a member of parliament. Is it Mr. Dubinsky? Jason, do you remember?
Yeah, Alexander, I think.
Dubinsky. Are you familiar with him? Because his tale came to us independent from your situation as somebody who was a rival of Zelensky, and now he's in jail under, some would argue, trumped up charges in Ukraine. Are you familiar with his situation?
You lost sound, Andrei? I think we lost sound on Andrei for some reason.
I can hear you.
Andrei, you can't hear us?
He can't hear.
I'm not sure what happened. Didn't change anything over here.
Maybe I brought Dubinsky up.
It's really strange.
He's now...
Wow.
He can't hear. That's strange.
Wow.
Is it possible to get a message to him to reconnect or something? Or
he's not muted.
Yeah, I'll keep talking.
Oh, there you go. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, there you go. So some sabotage when you mentioned people's names.
Dubinsky, yeah.
Outside. I know Dubinsky. I met him a couple of times in Ukraine, like twice, I think. So I don't know him that well personally, and like I know that he was with Derkach at one point, and with Kolomoisky, his right hand guy, and then he was part of the Zelensky's parliament. He was a member of parliament, and a journalist before.
Very strange. Very strange.
Frozen.
Andrei's frozen now. So we have a perfect connection to him prior to speaking about Dubinsky. And then the second Dubinsky comes up. Wow.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
You're back. They don't want you talking
Something's
about
going on. Yeah.
Dubinsky.
So I don't know him that well personally, but I know there's a lot of questions about him and what about his work. But that's up to him, and maybe you guys know more. So.
All right. Well, let's try a different one then. One of the strange things for me studying all this for now many years was when we initially, Jason and I and others, raised questions about U.S. policy vis-a-vis Russia, U.S. policy vis-a-vis Ukraine, and during the impeachment when we had this supposed whistleblower, who now is the picture frozen, Jason?
I don't think so. No, we're good.
Okay. All right. The supposed whistleblower, whose name we can say, Eric Ciaramella, and the Vindman brothers. Can you help us understand why a young guy like Eric Ciaramella would have as much influence as he had when Trump was president, working with folks in Ukraine, I guess, to build this case that was complete, I think, BS. How did this Eric Ciaramella acquire the influence that he had when he was in government at such a young age?
I met Ciaramella a couple of times. One in the White House, when the National Security Council meeting, and the second time we met for coffee through Liz Zentas, who introduced us. And I believe we met a third time in Ukraine. I don't recall that he was there, but I was told that people told me that he was there with for dinner because there were a bunch of other folks. And but overall, from what later on understanding who he was a CIA operative directly working for the CIA overseeing Ukraine and advising the director of CIA during that period of time on Ukraine itself. So he was not just a White House staff member worker. He was CIA operative overseeing Ukraine and run processes within Ukraine and reporting to the director of CIA. So that's why he has so much power.
Was he not?
He was
very young. Wasn't he in his 30s?
No, he's young, but he was overall. He had a high-level job position. He was a CIA agent. He was not just a government official worker. He was placed there for a specific role to oversee the president and to report back to the Central Intelligence Agency.
And do we find it curious at all that Ciaramella is also a lawfare contributing editor? Is this not just a way, who knows if he's paid some sort of stipend or something, but this Lawfare Institute is a very suspicious, in my opinion, very likely CIA cutout. This is run by Ben Wittes, who is the self-proclaimed best friend of James Comey. We know that Naboo was essentially an FBI cutout in Ukraine. And so there's this whole connection between the CIA, the FBI, these nonprofits that are not regulated at all.
And actually, another theme I like to weave in here, I think, Andrii, you may find this interesting. The government and the banking titans who were most active in what I refer to as privatization transactions. That's where you have a government like the UK in the late 70s, early 80s, 80%, an estimate is 80% of the economy in the UK was owned by the government, one way or another. And in the 80s, under Thatcher, the UK government worked with principally UK merchant banks, but also international merchant banks to privatize these state-owned assets. And what that involved was typically you would get an investment bank to say that, the energy piece, British Gas, or you just pick a piece of what was owned by the government, the post office, is worth a certain number. And you would then cut a deal with outside investors to put fresh capital into that entity. And then you'd either take it public or you'd sell it or whatever. And the opportunities to rape and pillage, to misvalue those assets and enrich the insiders who would snap up these state-owned assets one way or another for very small percentages of what the things were really worth, and then instantly offload them and become oligarchs. This is not something that happened first in the Ukraine or Ukraine. It happened first in the UK. And then it went and spread across Western Europe. And then after the Berlin Wall came down into Eastern Europe, and then after 1991, the former Soviet Union. My background was in actually valuing those, not for privatizations, but in general valuing companies. And I'm well familiar with, the difference between a real value and an insider fake value. And there's a whole exercise here that I think has to happen where we go back into history and understand who it was who was snapping up these government-owned assets at fire sale prices, and who are the government officials in the various countries who would take bribes to make these things happen. This is a long-standing and disgusting chapter in modern history around the world. And the very people who criticize the billionaires and trillionaires for making money in the private sector are people who today, grifted in that way or benefited off the grift and are doing whatever they can to steal money out of aid to Ukraine, steal money out of aid to Haiti, steal money out of the COVID program, steal money out of climate change. This is a big and truly sad chapter that has wrecked Ukraine, I think, in the short run.
Yeah. And that's what that's why the West hates Russia, because Putin stopped that. When he came down in, he saw factories that were sold for $30,000, aircraft factories. Imagine Boeing being sold for $30,000, for example.
Yeah.
Or $1 million, and then their value would be over $1 billion. And that's what, and he stopped that and he reversed that. So that's why they started to hate him, because he pushed him out of the market. In Ukraine, that happened the same way, but nobody pushed them back. Everything in Ukraine had so much production factories. We had Ukraine during the Soviet times would produce aircraft, one of the largest in the world. They would produce ships, warships, tankers. We have a Nikolaev ship factory in southern Ukraine, and it was sold to the oligarchs and privatized. Even though the Chinese offered us $1.5 billion for it, it was sold for $200 million.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a great production line. The Swedes wanted to buy it in the 90s. It was pretty well known. And they had their facility in Brazil for ship repair in that part of the world. So it was like basically a huge chain of production. It was all during the Soviet times. Ukraine produced rockets, rocket ships, satellites, nuclear weapons, tanks, not just farming. It was a whole huge chain of production, which was then destroyed, privatized, and basically sold off by pieces. And the pieces that were sold off to the oligarchs, today's oligarchs, like Pinchuk, who works with the USAID with USAID and Soros and the Clinton Foundation, who financed the Clinton Foundation, who is the son-in-law to the former president of Ukraine, Kuchma. His name is Pinchuk. He bought a lot of that production. And he works for not just pays the politicians in the US, he works for the British intelligence. Akhmetov works for MI6. That's why Akhmetov, the guy who built Donetsk, Renat Akhmetov, the guy who owns the Donetsk soccer club.
Right.
He was part of a gang, a mafia gang in Eastern Europe, in Eastern Ukraine. He would kill people, right? And he has no problems going to the West because he's protected by the West. He worked for the MI6. That's why he was, when the civil war in Donbass started, he did not stop it, even though it's his homeland. He actually helped promote it and push it. And he has a house in London and he just bought the largest villa or apartment building in Monaco for over $500 billion or something, or $1 million. It's like huge real estate project that was just bought off by him and one of the most expensive in the world. So these people would buy off these properties, work with the West, sell out their souls to the West, destroy Ukrainian economy, even though that production would be helpful to be sent eastward. We would send all our production towards Russia, Asia, That's what people. India used to buy our planes. China used to buy our planes, and then when the coups happened and we went into the Western world, everything was blocked out from the East and sold out to the West on high margins of exports and basically destroying the businesses from within. Even for the oligarchs themselves, they got poorer. But to protect their money, which they stole, they worked with the West and needed that because that's what kept safe their lagoons of cash flow, which they laundered in the 90s and beginning of 2000s to the West. But this happened in Ukraine also. It was all coordinated, not just by the Ukrainian oligarchs, but by the West itself. As you said,
Well,
people were there. I know Americans who were there helping Russia doing the privatization, like helping people like Chubais and other ones in Russia to do
right.
that, and then doing the same thing in Ukraine.
So what I mentioned Vindman, and one of the things that I struck me as incredibly odd is that one of the Vindman brothers, the one who was in the U.S. military, I think he either said or testified that he was offered the position of defense minister of Ukraine while he was still serving in U.S. military function. And just for that, like, entertaining that type of discussion, if I were president of the United States, which I never will be, if I found out somebody was doing that in our military, talking about, becoming the defense minister of a foreign country, you're gone. I mean, we'd have a legal process. You'd be accused of something. You'd be stripped of your citizenship, and go live in Ukraine. But you can't do both. You can't be in our military and defense minister of Ukraine, but unless that was just total BS.
No, I think that's true, and there were examples of that when American citizens like Natalia Yaresko worked as the Minister of Finances, and then she worked for advising and finance in Puerto Rico for the United States. She's a U.S. citizen working as the Minister of Finance in Ukraine, and the Obama White House was pushing her in different positions. Udiana Suprun, the Minister of Health, being a U.S. citizen and working as a Minister of Health in Ukraine, being coordinated and supported by the CIA in Kiev on the ground. I know that personally because I know the people who worked and coordinated her. And there's numerous of other cases where right now most of the elites in Ukraine are having citizens like Zelensky's British passport. That's why he's protected by the British intelligence. Other people have different other passports. But overall, Vinland themselves, they're a hideous bunch. First of all, I remember when he testified, he mentioned my name and said that I'm corrupt or Russian agent during the impeachment hoax, even though I never met him. I don't know who the guy is. It'd be interesting to know who he is because I personally never met him before that period of time. I never even knew about his existence before he came out and talked about me. He knew about stuff about me, which is interesting, but that's separate. And now his brother is selling weapons from Poland under the guidance of repairing weapons, under the documents that they're repairing tanks and machinery for Ukrainian military. They're actually selling weapons from Poland, Rzeszów, to Ukraine and to support this war. That's how they're making their money. And that's how basically the brothers are coordinating to push themselves through elections in Congress or Senate, whatever they want to run. So this is their motto. They don't care. Today they sell off their soul to the devil. Tomorrow they lie. Then they take a position in defense of a different country, of a separate country. But about that defense minister position, I could 100% guarantee you it was coordinated and worked with the CIA. That the CIA would happily want him to be placed there and that position, so he would then sabotage and undermine and that role for the United States within Ukraine. So that's how it works. Unfortunately, the United States has their hands everywhere, and nothing good out of it comes out. If it was good, if Ukraine would prosper, having all those Americans after we took away Yanukovych, he fled to Russia, that bad guy, where we had one hryvnia was 5 hryvnias was $1. Now it's 45 hryvnias to $1. The inflation is so high, skyrocketed. The country is destroyed. We would have a better Ukraine, prosperous Ukraine. People would be living, not dying. Yes, and we would be criticizing. Then we'd be called maybe Russian agents saying, "Oh, these guys are no good. They're liars and idiots and whatever. Look at them." But no, we're saying, look, the West is not telling a lot of this stuff. The media is not reporting how the men in Ukraine don't want to fight. They're being scammed like dogs from the streets and thrown to the front lines, and because they
with
don't
no
want to
training.
fight.
with no training.
No training. You know how much training they get? From 3 days to 2 weeks maximum. That's not even training. They're just waiting there to get when the finance come in, so they can get repositioned, so they can refuel the trucks and then take them out somewhere. They get fed like dogs. They don't even have plates. They eat from plastic bottles, which they cut in half and use them as plates. And there's no real food there. No toilets. There was just a hole in the ground and those waiting points. It's like a prison. So I'm just saying, this is the reality we're talking about. This is the Ukraine, a prosperous country that was once filled with loving people who love both the West and the East. Now it's a country of hatred and destruction. I had to flee Ukraine, not because of the war in 2022. I was there the first month of the war. I was there for the first 2 weeks of the war. I was in Kiev, and then I was in Western Ukraine before I crossed the border officially, legally, to Europe. I saw what happened. I had to leave not because of the rockets flying over my head, but because I was threatened by my own government. My ad was put on all the TV stations in Ukraine. Members of parliament from the neo-Nazi groups talking about me on social media to kill me and my family. And I got calls, threats from different politicians and government officials that they're going after me and they're going to hang me.
Unbelievable.
That's the reality why I had to flee Ukraine. That's what really happened because I got sanctioned by the U.S. as a Russian agent, put on a Mirotvorets kill list, put on the list. There's also another list by the Department what's the military intelligence of Ukraine by the former Budanov. He was head of it. I'm on that blacklist because I'm U.S. sanctioned as a Russian agent. I should be killed. But this is the reality. This is what Ukraine is. It's not the country that I grew up in and wanted to come back from America, which I did 15 years ago. I did not stay in the United States. I came back to Ukraine, and then I had to flee from it.
It's an incredible story, Andrei. I want to make sure people know that they can connect with you on X. You're there at Telizhenko Andy. We've got to have you back sometime to continue this conversation.
I'm being banned on X a lot. That's what I can tell you, because I cannot get a blue check mark. I can, even though other people who are sanctioned to get blue check marks, I cannot. When I used to have more than 20,000 followers before I got sanctioned. Now I have, it's declining time to time. Plus, when I post, people don't see my posts.
Unbelievable.
Even though before this never happened. So this is just, people would know, they can follow me and see my page, but I'm just saying that what's the reality there too.
Amazing. We're going to have you back sometime soon, Andrei. Thank you so much for joining us. And Charles, thank you for another great show. I want to remind everybody they can sponsor Crowdsource the Truth on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com or subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Andrii Telizhenko, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Andrei.
Day, everybody.
Stay safe.
Thank you.